Hi, BookTube. This is my August/September wrap-up of nonfiction books that I read. So let's get started. The first book I want to talk about is In Pieces by Sally Field. The reason I wanted to listen to this book is I wanted to hear Sally tell her own story, and I read that she didn't have a ghostwriter and that she'd been working on this for a very long time to try and make sense of her own insecurities and fear that she suffered from, even though it seems on the outside like she had a very successful and fulfilling career. So she had a stepfather who was not a good influence on her and was very harmful to her. And I don't want to get too much into the details in case you want to read this yourself. But her mother was kind of oblivious to what was happening to her, and her stepfather was very controlling and constantly making her feel bad about herself and her abilities. And then she had a series of pretty bad boyfriends/husbands, and they didn't do much for her self-esteem either, especially Burt Reynolds, who seemed so sexy at the time and such a great guy, such a charming man, but he was racked with hypochondria and maybe some real illnesses as well, and he wanted a nursemaid and a mother, not a girlfriend, and especially not a successful actor girlfriend. So that was a kind of very interesting part of the book that I enjoyed. It's just basically her just working through all the things that happened to her, and then also talking a lot about the roles that she played and the persona that she had that the studio wouldn't let her get away from either. So a lot of people trying to control her, and it seems as though as she's in her 70s now that she woke up and sees the value of her life. So I highly recommend it if you like celebrity memoir. The next book I want to talk about is Educated by Tara Westover. Tara is a girl that her father was in a Mormon sect, that they were separatists from the government, and like they knew the people from Ruby Ridge who were in conflict with the government. And so her family was always in constant terror that the government was going to come get them, and they were definitely preparing for the worst, and that was their mindset. And education was just not a part of that mindset, and she ends up having to fight for everything she learns, as she doesn't go to high school, but she teaches herself, and then she ends up in college. So I won't give away too many details of this book either, because it reads like a novel. Every morning when I went walking, I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen to her next. I'd say it was a very good book for book clubs. There's a lot to talk about, and it's a lot about ambition and being able to break away from those mindsets that we are given when we're children, no matter what they are, and figure out our own paths. The next book I'd like to talk about is Prairie Fires: The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder by Caroline Fraser. I don't know if you've heard about this. I think some other people have talked about this on BookTube, but I thought this was a really great, well-researched, and very rich history of a certain period of time in our country where we encouraged people to go west and homestead and create farmland at the peril and the expense of the Native Americans, for one, and also against all the odds of natural disasters and grasshopper plagues, fires, wind, flood, and disease, with no governmental propping up for many years while they tried to tame the land or manifest west or whatever you want to call it. So, and then on top of that settler story, then we have the whole history of Laura Ingalls Wilder and what happened to her as a child, and all the moving around and some of her grievances that she had with some family members, and then having her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane. I think it's really safe to say that this book, that the Little House books would never have been written without the encouragement and prodding of Rose Wilder Lane, although she herself was an author and also not a nice person, and I think she had a lot of mental illness, and she was codependent with Laura, about their writing careers, and it was just a fascinating portrait of two women that you think you know from these books. And it turns out that she was very spiteful at times, and she was very anti-government. I will never read those Little House books again with the same emotion or with the same feeling, knowing what really happened to the family. But I'm glad that I know what happened, and I'm glad I read this book. I highly recommend it. The last book I'd like to talk about is The Real Lolita, The Kidnapping of Sally Horner and the Novel That Scandalized the World by Sarah Weinman. This was a really interesting look at a real-life case of a poor 11-year-old girl who gets groomed and then kidnapped by a pedophile, and she is missing for 2 years. Her family doesn't know where she is, and the newspapers cover the case extensively over time. And the thesis of this book is that Vladimir Nabokov was influenced by this case while he was struggling to finish Lolita. So there is evidence, even in the novel itself, that he did know a lot about the case. It was mentioned in his book, the Sally Horner case. So I think that's the least interesting part of the book. I think I was more enthralled by the actual history and all of the research that Weinman does to tell us about this kidnapping case, and then what happens to Sally as she grows older. And I'm also interested in Nabokov. I used to be a very big, wanting to read everything about his life and reading scholarship about him and reading his novels, and I still do admire much of his work, and I will pick it up occasionally, but I'm not in that Nabokov fangirl thing that I used to be in. So all in all, I'd say this is probably a 3.5-star book for me. So if you like this kind of book, and it's very sensationally written, like it's written for a magazine, but you can tell she did a lot of research, looking at census and looking at interviews and rereading old newspaper clippings and trying to follow the case, and I do admire that. So 3.5 stars. It was interesting, and I think that's all I have for now. And please look for my next video where I talk about the fiction I read, and I hope this all made sense. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of your videos and see what you read this month. So thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Bye.